Hi, this is Rohin. You're listening to the free version of the First Principles podcast. It is only one part of the full episode that we release for our premium subscribers. If you'd like to listen to future episodes the very first day they're released as one complete conversation, then please consider upgrading to our premium version. You can do that either by subscribing to the Ken's premium plan, which unlocks all our premium podcasts via our subscriber apps, or you can just subscribe to the Ken's premium channel on Apple Podcasts for a really affordable monthly subscription price. That will unlock all our premium podcasts. Our premium podcasts include First Principles, of course, but also 2 by 2 The Nut Graph, and Make India Competitive Again. Check the show notes for links to all of these. Now, back to the episode, and thank you for listening. Hello and welcome back to First Principles. Manish Sabharwal isn't an easy man to nail down. And by that, I don't just mean it was hard to nail down a time on his calendar to meet me for the podcast, which it was. Like with most founders and guests on First Principles, the gap between when I first invite them and when they finally appear is usually measured in months, sometimes years. I'd first emailed Manish for First Principles back in January 2023. But I'm saying Manish is hard to nail down also because he defies, resists categorization. Sure, he founded Teamlease, one of India's largest recruitment and human resource providers. It employs over 400,000 people, is listed on the stock exchanges, and is a great barometer of broader employment trends in India. But Manish is no longer involved with the day-to-day operations of the company. He is the executive vice chairman, and he's also the single largest individual shareholder. Instead, he leads a portfolio life, dividing his time serving on the boards of think tanks, regulatory bodies, universities, non-profits, and even private companies like Phonepe. He advises companies and governments on a host of topics like labor markets, regulation, employment, education, economic policy, and reforms. He's a columnist, and he reads books. Oh yeah, he says he's read a book a week for the last, wait for this, 42 years. Thus, when I sat down with Manish last Thursday, I went in prepared, or as prepared as I could be with my research and questions. But 10 minutes into the conversation, I decided to drop the conversation narrative I had in mind and instead let the conversation go where it needed to. Yes, we do cover entrepreneurship, ambition, finding product market fit by letting your customers guide your evolution, but we also go much further into topics that we normally don't. For example, India's macroeconomic and geopolitical chances today, regulatory cholesterol, Manish's favorite topic, higher education, and the jobs crisis, all peppered with pithy aphorisms, vivid analogies, and memorable quotes every few minutes. It's something that I've remembered Manish doing ever since I first met him as a journalist in the early 2010s. So, let's start. I'm Rohin Dharmakumar, this is First Principles, and here's my conversation with Manish Sabharwal. I want to go slightly sideways in the realm of employment. We spoke about jobs, employment, etc. I know another one of the spaces that you're interested in and involved in personally is education. And there's also, and I say this both as a parent and a journalist, we are seeing multiple, I think, crises around higher education and jobs and curriculums where it's not really clear that we have a lot of colleges and lots more coming up, whether their curriculum is in tune. We have a lot of students who are graduating, and even from many of the IIMs and IITs, even though now there are many more IIMs and IITs than there were when I graduated, being unable to find jobs. While all of this is happening with the, I would call, education 1.0 or colleges 1.0, which college is the framework that existed, there's also been this shift towards, and I think it's a more privileged urban kind of environment, towards newer schools, Ivy schools on one hand, and newer colleges, the Ashokas of the world, the Flames of the world, the Ahmedabad of the world, etc. So there seems to be this dual track education, the cleaving of the education space. And all of this seems to be happening while, of course, now the fact being that many Indians who used to emigrate from India to the US or Western countries for their education suddenly in the last 6 months or 12 months have figured out maybe that's not such a good idea. So I've seen articles, for instance, in The Economist saying is this India's Ivy League opportunity and where are India's Ivy League colleges? So to kind of tie all this together into a coherent question, how do you see this? I mean, what's the opportunity or problem around higher education or education in India? And is that also something that India can take advantage of? Because
college isn't what it used to be. The world has produced more graduates in the last 40 years than the 800 years before that. What is the consequence of that? 60% of taxi drivers in Korea have a college degree. 31%
of my home state, Kerala, where bus conductors have multiple degrees.
Yeah, 31% of Walmart checkout clerks in the US have a college degree, and obviously it's 15% of security guards in India. But the signaling value of college is undoubted. You went to IIM Bangalore. It's a good place to be at. Calcutta. It's a better place to be. It's a good place to be at, but better place to be from. Right? The fundamental value is being from IIM. People walk around thinking you're smarter than you are for the rest of your life because you went to IIM. And obviously Michael Spence got his Nobel Prize for the signaling value of higher education, maybe the primary value of higher education.
Have many of these colleges started mispricing that signaling value?
Well, I think they are. I think they are recognizing that they need to. But they have the cost disease, so it's not like they're making huge surplus. Their just costs are going up and they're moving up. But the question of the credentialing becoming the purpose of education, the question of what is a good education has been asked through history, right? Is it the lighting of a fire? Is it the filling of a bucket? Is it should it be learning for living? Should it be learning for earning? Is the objective of education to produce workers or good citizens? I think that this will always depend on your personal values, right? Unfortunately, in the last few years, there was a distortion in the US education system by this credentialing, which then became supported by the government. Like one of the biggest surprises for me in the last few months has been Harvard gets $90,000 per student per year from the government. I mean, how is it a private university if you get $90,000? Your average tuition is $60,000. So how you get more from the government per student? Now that doesn't go to the students; it goes to research and stuff like that. But fundamentally, universities are meant to teach. No, I mean, they're not only meant to do research. And now, I mean, most of these fancy professors whom they show in their brochures are not the ones you get taught by, at least not the ones that we've seen. So I think there's a crisis of higher education all over the world.
Including in India.
In India, it's a different crisis. In the US, it's a different crisis. I mean,
what's the Indian crisis?
We just didn't give Purna Swaraj to our universities we gave, in some sense, Purna Swaraj given to our citizens in 47, but to our companies not even in 1991. I'm still talking about the regulatory cholesterol. But if you think companies have a rough time, universities just have no space at all to do what they want. So I think it's important to let universities, if we want to create the Harvards and Princetons in India, and we are now seeing, I think Ashoka has a real shot at being among the top 100 universities in the world because of faculty, not because of hardware. And then that faculty attracts students, and then those students and faculty hopefully attract resources. But the crisis of higher education in India is that the government can't afford public education in the way that people anticipate it to be. If it can't afford it, then it has to give the space to private universities to thrive, and that has not fully been available till the last few years. I think NEP 2020 is a very important document which recognizes that the only renewable energy in a country is human capital. The only appreciating asset is human capital. And so the Purna Swaraj for universities now, universities can set their curriculum. They can do lots of things that they couldn't do in the past. You can be flexible about your duration of degrees. You can do many things. So, but the question is, where are the resources to create the universities? Harvard's $50 billion endowment was created by over 200-300 years, while we don't have the time. So I think we'll have to split our university system into a vocational system, which just delivers jobs and delivers your skills, and then there'll be the research university system, which focuses on the higher order things, whether it's liberal arts education, whether it is research in biology, whether it is computational stuff like that. Because finally, innovation. The binding constraint for India's software and pharma system, why hasn't pharma delivered new chemical entities and just done generics? And why has IT done services and not products? In some sense, you can think about the human capital system and the university system being the binding constraint. 99% of new drugs in the US launched between 2010 and 19 were funded by NIH or NHS. Through a university, which then commercialized through a pharmaceutical
simplistic,
company.
But perhaps not simplistic question. Why doesn't it now? Again, why doesn't it happen in India is my question. And obviously, before you say regulatory cholesterol, but perhaps let me
in
rephrase
this case,
that into,
I will say
how
that it's
can
constraints.
we make it happen?
It's constraints of financing, right?
So how do we make
the
that?
notion that you will be that's a chicken and egg problem, right? Do skills create jobs, or do jobs create skills? The only way to solve a chicken and egg problem is to become vegetarian, do something different completely. And I think that India is on its path. Our economic complexity is much higher than our GDP, right? One of my favorite professors at the Harvard Kennedy School is a guy called Ricardo Hosman. He says development is playing a game of Scrabble. Right? The government provides the vowels, the private sector provides the consonants, and development is making more words and longer words, right? When you only have one vowel like we had in the 50s, 60s.
And we're making a lot of two-letter words and three-letter words.
Now we're making 10, 15-letter words. So, but he comes up with a geographic atlas of economic complexity, and India's per capita is way lower than his model should estimate. And so I think India...
Is that the diversity discount? India is so incredibly diverse, which is a great
I think
thing
he
for
thinks
many
formalization, urbanization, industrialization, financialization, and human capital explain it. We have not enough formalization, urbanization, industrialization, financialization, and human capital, while our capacity and economic complexity. So unlike Latin America, which is a 5 horsepower engine running on 4 horsepower, India is a 10 horsepower engine running on 2 horsepower. So our capacity is inherently much higher, but our capacity utilization is lower. While in Latin America, their capacity utilization is higher, but their capacities are limited. They have not got the English language, the complexity, the software industry, the pharma industry, the entrepreneurs, the amount of venture capitalists. So I think India's economic complexity is a 10 horsepower engine running on 3 horsepower, which is a different problem than raising your horsepower.
How do you view the current geopolitical situation that India finds itself in, vis-a-vis, of course, everything that's happening in the world, in the US, in the Middle East, China, etc. Now, just a month or two ago, it looked like India was placed quite well to capitalize on, the US-China. I was about to use the word war, but let's say tariff war, right? Now it looks like it's not that much, given like Trump and the famous taco trade. Mm-hmm. Trump always chickens out. All those things have gone. So how do you, what does India do in such a situation? We've also, over the many years, over the last 5-10 years or so, not become part of many regional trade pacts or global supply chains, etc. And now you have this chaos playing out. So what should India do right now?
India should make herself stronger, right? America's autoimmune... urbanize India, formalize India, industrialize India. Each one of those is a very specific reform agenda. only 3% of total government spending is done at city levels in India. I mean, in the US, 50% of spending and even in China, 50% of spending and 50% of employment is at the local government level. In India, central government spends 48 lakh crores, state government spends 58 lakh crores.
Or 2 lakh. One of our earlier podcasts last week on 2x2 was essentially this: how much Bangalore needs to spend and how less control the local city government, or actually the absent local city government, has over them.
But 5 years ago, the state started spending more than central government. Now chief ministers have become the problem in devolution. Everybody likes devolution to their level. No, they don't want to give it to the next level. So I think, and it's not about urbanization, It's about good urbanization. Average taxi in Bangalore travels at 8 kilometers an hour. Most people can walk that fast. So urbanization is happening anyway. The question is good. So I think that the solutions, at least to me in India, if you urbanize India by devolving funds, functions and functionaries. What is power in government? It's funds, functions and functionaries. You devolve that to the state and local governments, you'll do it. How do you formalize India? How do you industrialize India? How do you financialize India? Are all linked to the solutions are pretty obvious, right? So my sense is when you're asking the how question, it sometimes there's a report 20 years old on every reform you want in India. It's already there. So I think the point will have to come is when we ask, why isn't that happening? Is it political courage, or democracies don't want to change, or is China's system the only way that you
at some level it seems to be that, right? I mean, as Indians, we don't seem to be, as citizens and voters, demanding it urgently enough or stridently enough.
Well, if we don't demand it, because politicians will respond to what is asked of them. Exactly. So if we decide to focus on societal issues, but in some sense the solutions to the societal problems, whether it is reservation, whether it is other things, will only come from growth. I mean, I keep coming back to government spending going up 100 times since 1990, while per capita going up 8 times. So it's done now. State governments like Punjab will stop paying salaries, or at least be completely bankrupt. I mean, there are many other states which have reached their limits. So my sense is this populism, or this notion of, you can somehow win elections.
Past its peak?
I think so, because just by fiscal constraints, states don't have the ability to do the fiscal deficits that, the central government can do.
Allow me to switch track a little bit, and I'll go back to the first question that I asked you, that what stage of your life are you in? And in that context, and taking forward from there, what are you doing these days? What does your typical week look like?
Well, I spend time on 5 non-profits, 1 university, Ashoka, 1 think tank, National Council of Applied Economic Research, 1 publishing venture, New India Foundation, where we give fellowships to write books about post-1947 India, and 2 schools, 1 Neve School, which is a high-end IB school, and 1 Kanpur Education Society, where my parents are from, where we have 15,000 kids. So I concluded that education, think tanks, universities, these are the infrastructure of sort of opportunity, or infrastructure of intellectual, which is what human capital is. So that's on the non-profit side. And then on the for-profit side, I continue to do Teamlease. I mean, still largest shareholder, still involved as vice chairman on the board. Still, I think that we're still a baby in diapers with 4 lakh employees. We should be the world's largest staffing company. That's still, and we have to double in size to get there. We will do that. So I spend a little bit of time on them. There's some independent board memberships. I'm on the Phonepe board. I do a few other things. But essentially, I've read a book a week for 42 years now. So I continue to do that. I continue to be involved in 2-3 book prizes. The NIF, the Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay book prize. So for that, I have to read multiple books. I forced my earlier investor, who made a lot of money on me, Gaja Capital, to launch a business book prize. So now I chair their jury. So it's a portfolio life in some sense, and that's what I wanted to do at this stage.
So when you're leading this portfolio life, how do you, because each of these portfolios in some senses, even though I get the sense that There is a diffused, they all come together in a larger sense.
Yes.
But if one were to look at it from the outside, it looks like each of them is pulling you in a different direction.
Yeah.
How do you reconcile that with your
But
own?
my policy work is what,
What drives you?
I think just the fact that I was born on the 10th floor, and it's to those who much is given, much is expected. I mean, that was what I grew up in, a civil service household, and the reality is that at this point I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. I have been born and gifted in ways that they could not have ever been done. So in some sense, it's that stage of life where I need to understand what I have learned. I need to process on how the battle for ideas, and finally that's what matters. Vested interests are highly overrated in anything, in a company, in a country, in an industry. So I at least am spending all my time making the case that while the external problems of India are challenging, we have to heal ourselves. We have to make ourselves stronger. My favorite Hindi poet, Ramdhari Singh Dinkar, he says, "Shama shobhati us bhujang ko jiske paas garal ho." Only the powerful can be kind, benevolent, and generous. Only snakes with venom can be, toothless, venomless snakes can't be generous. Gandhiji used to say that, right? A moth is incapable of violence, non-violence, because it's capable of violence.
Loosely, you're saying that you need to have power in order to not use it.
India was weak. We were weak from 47 onwards. We have to make ourselves stronger. We have to make ourselves stronger in our institutions, in our all the 5 things that I believe India needs: urbanization, formalization, financialization, industrialization, and human capital, involve a partnership between the government, private sector, and non-profits, right? The government has an execution deficit. Private sector has a trust deficit. Non-profits have an execution deficit. Everybody's looking down on each other, right? The government thinks everybody in the private sector is only profit-focused. We think all of them are corrupt. And anyway, non-profits have the look down on everybody with their virtue signaling and their pontification. So my sense is India's poor because of teamwork, right? So my view is that while I spend time I'm on the CAG board, I used to be on the RBI board, I'm on the Central Board of Education. So I've been to Delhi one day every week for the last 15 years. So I spend that time on policy. So I think that I see the private sector policy and non-profits in ways that I find will be the only solution to India's future. We have to do better teamwork between all 3 of them.
You use the word 2 times in the last minute or so, teamwork, right? Is that I don't know if this is a coherent question or not. Is that fundamentally due to us being what they call a low trust economy, where we sort of see everything as a zero-sum game, because it is, in some senses, we are a large country, we are a developing country, resources are limited. So a large part of the population, I come from a middle class background as well, we are grown up saying that if you want something, it probably means somebody else is not getting something. So collaboration and cooperation don't come naturally to us, because we feel that for us to win, somebody must lose, or if somebody else is winning, we are losing, right? Is there a relation there?
I think cultural explanations are at best the soft bigotry of low expectations, and at worst they are racism. What happened to the Hindu rate of growth, right? 1820 to 1950, India grew at 0.1%. From 1950 to 1991, we grew at 2%. From 1991 till now, we've grown at 7%, and we didn't shoot all the Hindus. No? So clearly, Confucianism was used to explain why China is poor. Now it's used to explain why China is rich. So I would not go down that path of this low trust societies. These are all, like South Asia is a West creation of America. It's the Indian subcontinent. This notion of low trust, high trust at low levels of per capita income, incentives explain a lot more than cultural explanations. The same.
Just a demand-supply mismatch. A large population, shortages,
regulatory cholesterol leading to connections being more important than the sweat of your back or this sweat of your brow or the strength of your back or the courage in your heart. As we become more meritocratic, and India is becoming more meritocratic, right? IPL, OTT and private equity have made Indian cricket has become more meritocratic that Ranji Trophy could not make it. OTT is making it much more meritocratic than Bollywood ever was or is. And partly Bollywood is dying because it's not moving beyond their kids. And private equity was really important for people like us who believed that you could not start a company if you didn't have money. So I think business has become more meritocratic. I think cricket has definitely become more meritocratic, and so has. So my sense is that it's clear to me that cultural explanations are a rabbit hole that is totally unnecessary to explain in India. You can explain in India's problems or its opportunities or its strengths with obvious sort of much more logical explanations than stuff like we are racist or we are this or that.
All right. You said that you've read a book a week for roughly 42 years. I'm sure you cannot get to that kind of consistency without evolving some kind of discipline or habits or patterns to be able to do that. What are yours?
I mean, routines are a sign of ambition, as Napoleon used to say, right? I mean, I have clear routines. I get up very early in the morning. I usually sleep very early. I work out every day. I read 7 newspapers a day. I know people find that, but I find the serendipity of running into what you're not looking for much better with the curated
Which
content.
are those newspapers?
I mean, across FT, Wall Street Journal, Economic Times, Mint, Indian Express, Times of India, I mean, Deccan Chronicle. I mean, I find that an intellectual sort of buffet, which is, and then it allows me to dive deeper into what I want rather than, I'm not sure the online world is yet moved to where the serendipity of what you're not looking for but need to know is replicated.
That's a bug in the online world, because in the online world, the job of an algorithm is to be able to give you more of what you like.
So do you think the online world will ever create that serendipity, or it's not a design possibility?
Well, I suppose it's already happening if you look at, but not at scale. I think scale kills everything. So if you look, for instance, at the federated social media world of Mastodon, the default there is no algorithm. It's you follow people and you see everything linearly, and in some senses it takes us back to the pre Facebook feed days, right? So I don't use Twitter or Facebook, etc. and stuff like that. I use Mastodon. But again, I think the point that I want to mention is that when you do this, you have to forego scale and global success, because the moment you chase scale, automatically the incentives change, and then you must do what will get you the most amount of engagement, people, users, etc. And then it becomes a rabbit hole. So I think we're in this phase right now where there is enough of a dissatisfied population globally, which is seeking alternatives to various sorts of late stage capitalism games. But I would argue that it's probably like 2%. Right, so there will be these bubbles.
And what do you see as late-stage capitalism's issues? Inequality.
If you look at, let's say, the way Meta or Facebook is evolving, if you see the way how ChatGPT is optimized, quote-unquote, for sycophancy, in order to be able to tell you what you want to hear, etc. Everything is optimized for more engagement, more revenue, and like to go back to something that you said earlier, who knows what's going to happen in the future? We are not responsible for it. So I don't know, maybe I'm not that optimistic on that count. It looks like a doom loop around a lot of digital technology products. And I think it's reached this stage where many people are saying these have destroyed democracy, these have destroyed relationships. We know what the science says about use of technology devices for children, for adults, etc. Right? So there is this, a lot of people want something different from it, but my sense is it's a very small market. So whatever products emerge to cater to this market will either continue to be niche or they'll start out at niche, but at some point, especially if they're venture funded, they will be forced to adopt the very techniques that they sought to counter.
Yeah, but there are enough people in the world dissatisfied with the status quo.
Absolutely. 2% of any large market is not a bad market.
No, but is it 2% only?
I just feel like, think about it, right? Like, what is the percentage of people who use, let's say, WhatsApp for messaging versus those who use Signal, right? It would probably be 2% or different. Like, even though Signal is fundamentally and from the ground up much more secure, encrypted, impossible for someone else to tap into all of those. But it doesn't have the social networks that WhatsApp has, etc., all of that, right? How many people are going to give up using Instagram for an unknown federated social media service where you can share videos? Not many, because the
network effects are
network effects. I think it's all connected. Like, I don't use WhatsApp, and it's one of the biggest things that I think people ask me that how do you manage to run a company without using WhatsApp? As though the two were kind of related or connected. So it goes back to maybe.
But you think the next 10 years will be much better than the last 10 years?
I
for
think
India
so, and I do think so, and I believe that as an Indian, as an entrepreneur, as a parent, I say that as a parent because I do look at my son's generation. He's 15, and I do believe that I feel like I'm Gen X. The next generation was millennial. So I feel like millennials got caught in the technology trap. Poor folks, they just they were, there when the entire internet, technology, social media boom took off. Gen X was a little late to it, so we were already kind of old and we didn't natively take to it. Millennials bore the brunt. And I think by the time Gen Z came up, schools had wisened up, parents had wisened up. So I feel like Gen Zs are much more cognizant of harms of technology and how best to use technology, etc. So when I look at my son, I'm much more confident that they are less likely to sleepwalk into accidental or pernicious use of technology than probably the generation that precedes them. And of course, I share your optimism around the fact that Indian demographics, talent, economy, etc. is poised to reap the benefits. I'm still on the wall when it comes to will we actually be able to. I sure hope we will be able to.
Because of? What do you say the binding constraints or constraints?
The binding constraints are just, all of that what you said, right? In spite of us having all the right reasons, we struggled, right? Maybe it's regulatory cholesterol. Maybe it's our inability to cooperate and collaborate. Maybe it's our diversity and demography, which I don't intend to kind of put down at all. I'm incredibly glad that we are as diverse as we are, because I look at what's happening in the US right now. I look at what happens in China, etc. And I look at what diversity can mean for us. And I, look at India and say, there's no way this could happen in India because we are just too diverse for that. Now, the counterpoint for that is, because we are so diverse, we don't move as fast. It goes back to the analogy of the elephant.
Yes.
We move slow, so you have to observe India in decades.
No, but consistently warm beats hot or cold, right? I think 6%.
Fully. Showing up every
for
day.
30 years
Showing up every day is one of my
work.
favorite philosophies, and I'm sure you've kind of taught that to your kids as well, that like showing up every day and doing something consistently beats being an outlier on some days.
Yeah,
and then
Ludo versus Snakes and Ladders, right? Snakes and Ladders, that big snake at 98 brings you to 12 versus it's a thrill to sort of, versus, the consistency of the fixed costs of democracy in India make us warm rather than hot or cold. I think those fixed costs are worth paying. I think we may have digested some of those fixed costs also. It takes time for societies to digest the fixed costs of it. I think that we have digested them. And obviously there are interesting divergences between North India and South India, between East and West, and what will happen if these divergences continue. But my sense is that the scale of India, the 1.3, 1.4 billion people, combined with us being this outlier in technology where every company is now a technology company, right? So we have the switching costs in software that China has in manufacturing. We have the large domestic mass, which is still, very far away from the productivity frontier. So in some sense, it's a bunch of luck, it may be a bunch of circumstances, but it does feel like our time and we have to take advantage of it.
Yeah, I think just the definition of what time is fluid, but that's fine because time scales measured for
rich countries got rich. All the countries we consider rich got rich with 3% growth for 90 years.
Yeah, it was a very interesting paper. I don't know if you read earlier last week by Thomas Piketty and a co-author, which actually analyzed and provided counter theories for Europe's wealth and America's wealth over the last 200 years. And it posited what would have happened if, let's say, commodity prices were 20% higher during these 50 years or 100 years, and how Southeast Asia and Africa would have been much richer. Yeah. Or what would have happened, so those are very interesting points because I think we all live in the present.
Yeah, but those are the what ifs of history. I think in India's case, the 6% growth right now we're at 7, we'll go down to 6. India is, if you're at 6, don't worry, we're going to 8. If you're at 8, don't worry, we're going back to 6, right? And that is not a bad positioning in today's world of uncertainty. But we can't use the current storm outside. We're all in the same storm, we're not in the same boat, right? And India has to figure out making ourselves stronger in ways that, yes, the storm outside will calm down. Is Trump a climate change for America or a passing shower? It's like an autoimmune disease on the 3 things that made America sort of strong, right? Immigration, global companies, and their universities. But in some sense, we should take advantage of this autoimmune disease that America has developed. In the short run, it will cause pain for us. But in the long run, I think this world of churn when people are coming from behind, disruptions of status quo offer more opportunities than they offer pain and challenges.
Does this also relate to, and this is a conversation we had on a separate podcast with Mohit Satyanand, I'm sure you know of him, where he mentioned a lot of this comes down to our, as Indians, philosophy and approach to life. We tend to take a slightly longer view of things, which may be a good thing or a bad thing, that sometimes we are not impatient enough to demand or expect what we want right now, and we are patient and that this will come.
But are we?
That we are better off than our parents were. And that's a great thing. Therefore, we don't demand, but that also means that we're not demanding much more for our children and their generation right now, which is the point that you mentioned about being good ancestors.
Yeah, these back to cultural explanations. My sense is that I find anthropology and sociology and lately becoming, so much racism, and it doesn't explain what Indian. Yes, we've had the long view for a long time in some sense. Yes, Hinduism is a different cadence or a different rhythm than even Buddhism. Forget about Christianity and Islam. But I'm not sure that, Bangladesh versus Bengal, is it the difference in their economic destiny because they're Muslims and in Bengal they're Hindus, or because they speak the same language? So I would say that, our economic problems come from the 1955 Avadi resolution.
Our economic problems are economic problems.
They're economic problems, and if you create the right incentives, you entrepreneurial gene is equally distributed. When we got in our own way, we stayed poor. When we get out of our way, we will become rich, and rich will we become rich with. So I care less about the Gini coefficient, because if you threw Mukesh Ambani, Nandan, and
which is,
Adani
just for our
into
listeners,
the
is the
Indian Ocean.
inequality coefficient.
Yeah, if you threw them into the Indian Ocean, India's inequality would come down, but the poor wouldn't be better off. So I think let's focus on prosperity rather
Are you
than
worried about that
equality.
at a global level? Because some of the viral posts that I've seen about America's inequality, or like between how much its top 1% or 2% earns versus the rest, has started to approach or has exceeded what existed during the French Revolution
Yeah, but
days.
60% of people in the US in poverty have a car and 40% have air conditioning, right? Let's focus on median household income rather than jealousy. I actually don't care if the rich people get rich, as long as there's no poverty of hunger, there's no poverty of shelter, there's no poverty of education, there's no poverty of healthcare in India. I mean, I'm not worried whether billionaires do with their money, as long as we take the median household income to $10,000-$20,000 rather than the 2,000.
But those usually don't operate so cleanly, right? When
Why? There's
wealth
no
reaches a
democracy.
certain-
There's nobody democracy with with the per capita income, a large one of $40,000.
No, my point was not that. My point is that at such levels of wealth, the lines start to blur between wealth of individuals, wealth of nations, power, regulatory capture, and we're seeing that in the
But
US.
was that true in the Maharaja's time? I mean, that time it was 99-1. No, so
Right.
is there an interim period that's just some golden age? I mean, nostalgia is usually amnesia. yaar. I mean, when was there an equal distribution of wealth or capability? I actually think the modern state, being a welfare state, is a relatively new concept. Even in 1900, UK was spending 10% of GDP on government spending was 10% of GDP. Now, France's 60% of GDP spending is wrong. India's 17-18. So modern state being a welfare state is an accepted concept. So social security nets, public provision of education, these are now accepted concepts. So my sense is, how are you going to fund the state? Not by debt, fund it by taxes. I have no problem with the welfare state. I welcome the welfare
But that's
state.
the direction that the US is reversing, right? They're essentially cutting taxes for the richest.
Yes, and not everybody in the US agrees with that also. So I'm not sure that that's just a phenomenon. So my sense is that, the US will heal itself. It'll take 5-10 years to do that. It's a resilient society. But that offers us an opportunity, who are coming from behind and who, by all emerging markets,
So it's like chaos is an opportunity. is
No, and
broadly.
our economic complexity has always been higher. So we're a 10 horsepower engine running on 4 horsepower.
No, I meant that in the geopolitical context, that what's happening in the US.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity for us. What's happening in China, what's happening in Japan, the sale of adult diapers is higher than baby diapers. What's happening in America, what's happening in Europe. I mean, this is an opportunity for India, and I think we're sufficiently taking advantage of it. I don't think India will do 12% growth rate like China did just post WTO. I don't think the fixed cost of democracy will tolerate the inflation that sometimes creates in the short run. So I think that if we do 6 to 8%, more towards 8 than 6, then many of these extreme poverty has already been renegotiated. So we've already... Roti Kapda Makan now includes education, healthcare, cell phone and other things. Now hopefully it will include a good place to live. So we'll keep redefining poverty over the years. Our biggest problem in India is that 40% of our labor force is still on farms. That is, we should be very embarrassed about that number 30, 40 years into liberalization. I think our kids will change substantially for them.
Manish, thank you so much.
Wonderful to catch up, Rohin. Thank you.
Thank you. This episode was produced by Hari Krishna. Mixing and mastering for the episode was done by the wonderful Rajiv CN, our resident sound engineer. And before you check out, if you've been a long-time listener of the podcast and are glad we're back, do tell the world that by sharing this episode with everyone you think will find it valuable. Okay, this is me, Rohin Dharmakumar signing off. We'll be back soon with another episode.